So we're going to continue to look at China. And ancient China is said to be responsible for four inventions that were crucial to the development of modern technology. The magnetic compass, paper, this was invented during the Han Dynasty, printing, and it's going to be the Middle Ages before Europe develops this technology, and gunpowder. So think about the impact of those four inventions of that technology on the world today. So I want to talk specifically about three idea systems that emerge in China that have had a huge impact on China, both ancient and modern. Just as India is known for its two great religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, China is known for these three systems. Hinduism and Buddhism were concerned with freeing the soul from the process of rebirth by reaching or merging with a higher plane after death, nirvana or Brahman. The Chinese traditions, though, were more concerned with the here and now, I guess you could say, than with the hereafter. Each emerged in the period of 500 to 200 BC, and each tried to help their followers understand the universe and their places in it, but each took a very different direction. Here are the terms. Go ahead and write them and then listen for them as we move forward. The first idea I want to look at is Confucianism. Now, probably no figure is more associated with China than was the teacher Confucius, who you see here, a representation of him. His name actually means first teacher. He lived during the 6th century BC, during a time of great crisis in China. I mentioned the other day in the other lecture how we have this period of the warring states when these Chinese states are basically embroiled in a civil war. Well, that's when he's living. So it's a time of crisis. He wanted to get a government job. He wanted to be an advisor, but in order to do that, you had to get a sponsor, and he couldn't, which meant no government job. He was really upset by the violence and the moral decay he saw around him. He believed that the golden years, you could say, of the Zhou dynasty were far behind. So what he did was he started traveling, and he began sharing his ideas, and his followers recorded these ideas and then shared them even further. And virtually every Chinese student through the 20th century would have studied his ideas and his sayings. And the doctrine that emerged is known as Confucianism. So what's going on? Well, there's constant warfare among numerous Chinese armies and resulting slaughter. Confucius's ideas paralleled the people of China who looked for a way to restore order to society. So he's trying to give them a way to restore that order. So some people ask, are the Confucian ideas the heart of a religion or a philosophy? Well, they are concerned with ethical and political goals, but not spiritual ones. Confucius was willing to stipulate to the fact that there was some divine force or order in the universe, but that said, he was much more concerned with making sense of the world he lived in. According to Confucius, the key to proper behavior was to behave in accordance with the Tao, or the way. So according to Confucius, there were two critical elements in Tao, duty and humanity. He believed that the idea of duty meant that all people had to subordinate their own interests to the broader needs of the family and community. So what this means is it's not the individual, but the whole that's important. It's the common good that matters. And he believed that it mattered that society carefully observe these rules. So does courtesy matter? And if so, why, according to Confucius? Well, he would say that the very health of, let's say, a classroom, and by extension society, depended on careful observation of these rules. Every person in every relationship had a duty to one another. Wives had to obey husbands, according to Confucius. But what's the husband's obligation? Well, he needs to be a good husband and a good provider and protect his wife to the extent that he can, to the best of his abilities. The family was of incredible importance to Confucius. The idea of duty is sometimes given the more modern name of work ethic. If people work hard one by one to fulfill their duties, then society will prosper as a whole. And, we see that idea in today's society. So it's interesting that concepts that the West considers to be very modern have such ancient roots. The 18th century Enlightenment was founded on the belief in progress and the ability of man to improve himself. And it was thought that if he could do that, he could improve society as a whole. Well, that's what Confucius was talking about many centuries earlier. Confucius thought that people had to work to improve society around them. So what's the purpose of a ruler? What does a ruler have to do? Well, certainly he has to rule well. He has to be a good and just ruler. He has to set a good example. The idea is that if he sets a good example, the people will follow. Now, the second key element in the Confucian view is the idea of humanity. So what does that mean? It means compassion, empathy, behaving towards others in the proper way. So it's not exactly the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but more so do not do unto others what you do not want done to you. Confucius was a really harsh critic of his own times, and he believed that the Zhou dynasty was in decline. And he believed that it was essential that people change their ways and begin to work together to fix the problems in society and in turn create a better society. Now, Confucius also had an important idea about government. He believed that government service should not be limited solely to those of noble birth, but that merit should determine who served in the government. And this was a very important idea because up to that time, the only people who had any chance of a government position were those at the top of society. So what Confucius is saying is that everybody in society should have the same opportunities. And if you have someone who's a hard worker, who's talented, intelligent, etc., he should be able to use those skills to get ahead. Confucius's ideas had a very strong appeal to his contemporaries. He spent much of his life traveling and spreading these ideas. He died in 479 BC, but after that his writings were broadly circulated, and so his ideas continued to travel and to spread. A second system of ideas that emerged, and in many ways a competitor to and a critic of Confucianism, was Taoism. Taoism is a system of ideas based on the teachings of someone who may or may not have really existed, a man named Lao Tzu, the old master. The ideas of Taoism became popular a bit after Confucius in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. The main ideas of Taoism are found in a short book called the Tao Te Ching, The Way of the Tao. This book may be the work of many authors over several centuries. A legend says that Lao Tzu was unhappy with life in China, so he was just going to leave. So he packed up his belongings, took his water buffalo, and he's heading out of town. But he gets to the border, and the border guard begged him to write down his wisdom. And so we have the origins of the Tao Te Ching. Now remember, he may or may not have existed. So the most basic ideas of Taoism are pretty straightforward. It's not concerned with the meaning of the universe, but with proper forms of behavior on Earth. But it approaches these ideas from a different direction than did Confucius, where Confucius essentially said, look, we all have to work hard to improve life on Earth. Taoists believe that inaction was the true way. It's pointless to waste time and energy on problems that defied solution. So instead of the social activism of Confucians, the Taoists devoted their energies to reflection and introspection in hopes that they could understand the natural principles that govern the world and could learn just to live in harmony with them. So what that means is you don't spend your lives pursuing power and wealth and things like that. You find virtue by living in harmony with nature. And that's the best way, according to Taoists. Seek harmony in the universe by not you don't do anything. You don't pursue those things I mentioned. Let nature take its course by not interfering with it. There's more ritual associated with Taoism, and so of the three systems, it's the closest to a religion. Here's a bit of wisdom from Lao Tzu. Without going outside, you can know the whole world. Without looking through the window, you may see the ways of heaven. The farther you go, the less you know. Thus the sage knows without traveling. He sees without looking. A little Taoist meditation. He works without doing. Do you think you can take over the universe and improve it? I do not believe it can be done. The universe is sacred. You cannot improve it. If you try to change it, you will ruin it. If you try to hold it, you will lose it. Well, Lao Tzu developed the concept of Tao, often translated as the way, and he widened its meaning to just this inherent order or property of the universe. The way nature is, or action without action, is the idea. And this doesn't mean that you should just hang around and do nothing, but you should avoid explicit intentions or strong wills or proactive initiatives. Like I said, don't go pursuing power. Don't go pursuing wealth. Lao Tzu believed that violence should be avoided as much as possible, and that military victory, which logically would be attained through the use of force, that should be an occasion for mourning rather than triumphant celebration. So the idea is that you need balance and harmony in everything you do. The third philosophy to come out of ancient China was known as legalism. Legalism had a pretty negative view of human nature. Legalists believed that humans were evil by nature. So if you're seeking order in society, you believe that citizens can only be brought into line by harsh laws and stiff punishments. Legalists disagreed with Confucius that a government of superior men, like men working to better society, that a government like that could solve society's problems. Instead, they argued that law must be impersonal. The legalists also disagreed with Confucius about the moral core of the universe. Only firm action by the state could bring order. Human nature was corrupt. That means that even officials could not be trusted to be fair. The only way you can have or create an orderly society is to have a strong ruler. All human actions should be subordinated to the effort to create a strong and prosperous state that was obedient to the will of the people. So the idea is that people will be good because they're afraid of the punishment. They're not going to be good for good's sake, for being good, or for the sake of being good. Confucius had believed that the king had a duty to set a good example, which the people would then choose to follow. The legalists did not believe this. People were not capable of being good. So forget compassion and understanding and empathy. Only fear of harsh punishment, like I said, would cause the people to serve the interests of the ruler. So what's happening with the government? Well, the Zhou dynasty fell finally in 256, but the period of 400 to 200 BC was one of bloody civil war. Powerful local dynasties totally ignored the Zhou dynasty and its attempts to govern, and they fought one another, each hoping to become powerful enough to claim that it had the mandate of heaven. The family that was successful in creating a new dynasty that ruled much of China was that of the Qin, and this is the dynasty that gives its name to China. This dynasty, as you can see by the years, didn't rule for very long, only about 15 years from 221 to 206 BC. The first ruler was named Qin Shi Huangdi, which means the first Qin emperor. And he actually came to the throne of the Qin in 246 BC at the age of 13. Even though the Qin dynasty ruled for a very short period of time, they dramatically changed Chinese politics in three significant ways: government administration, efforts to unite and unify China, and concerns with border protection. And I want to look at each of those. Now, many contemporary historians say that it is with the Qin dynasty that we really see a united China and one that's ruled by a true dynasty. So let's look at these three ideas. Let's look at the impact on the government. In regards to government administration, legalism was adopted as the regime's official policy. Anyone who was opposed to this new dynasty was punished or even executed. The Qin dynasty ruled a highly centralized state. The central bureaucracy was divided into three divisions: the civil division, the military division, and the censorate. And then they were even further divided and subdivided into provinces and counties. Inheritance didn't determine the job that you got, meaning officials did not inherit their positions. This is what had always been done before under the Zhou. But now, with this new dynasty, we see officials being appointed and dismissed by the emperor. So he's controlling everything. And remember that under legalism, man was believed to be corrupt and evil. So the idea was that no one other than the emperor could be trusted. The censorate was a system of inspectors who checked on all government officials to make sure they were doing their jobs. So essentially, they were spies, and they were sent out all throughout the empire to be the eyes and the ears of the emperor, basically, and make sure people were doing what they're supposed to do. Qin Shi Huangdi also worked to unify China. So what did he do? He created a single monetary system, so no matter where you went within the empire, you could use the same money. He ordered the building of a system of roads throughout the entire empire, and the great majority of them connected his capital city to other areas of China. He reduced the power of the nobility by dividing their estates among the peasants, and then he taxed them directly. So the idea is that this is a society where power and wealth is based on land. So you break the power by taking away the land. And in doing that, you gain power for yourself, but you also earn the gratitude and the loyalty of those to whom you give the land. So who was the land given to? the peasants. And then he turned around and taxed the peasants directly, which meant that money's coming directly to him instead of the way it used to be, which was via the nobility. So before, the nobility would collect the taxes from the peasants and then pay a portion to the emperor, but now it's all coming directly to him. He was very aggressive in foreign policy also. He extended the southern border of China, for example, all the way to the Red River in modern-day Vietnam. He was very aggressive in building a series of canals from the Yangtze River to various cities in China as a way of faster transportation and communication, but also unifying the various cities. During this time, there was a major concern in the north. There was a nomadic people around the Gobi Desert, and they were known as the Xiongnu. They were nomads who had mastered the art of riding on horseback, and they ranged far and wide in search of pasture for their flocks. They were organized loosely into tribes, and they moved with the seasons from one pasture to another. As I said, they had mastered the art of fighting on horseback. Now, this gave them an advantage. The Chinese at this point in the Qin dynasty, they are using water buffalo. Why would fighting on horseback be an advantage over a water buffalo cavalry or an infantry? Think about it. Think of the speed. You've got much more speed with horses than you do with foot soldiers or with water buffalo. And these people became a huge challenge to the communities on the northern frontier. And we begin to see individual attempts to build a barrier, some sort of wall to keep these people out. Qin Shi Huangdi's solution was to strengthen the existing system of walls. Now, today's wall is not the Qin wall. Some portions of the Qin wall are still in existence, but they were built out of loose dirt and fill, and so much of it hasn't weathered the centuries very well. The Qin didn't invent the idea of a wall, but what they did was they began to knit together various pieces of the wall. And then dynasties that come afterwards are just going to keep adding to that. So in the end, the wall was believed to be about 5,500 miles long. Here you see some pieces of the Qin wall that are still in existence. And here you see the wall today. Like I just said, it's believed to be about 5,500 miles long, and it was a massive project that required the effort of thousands upon thousands of laborers. Most of them were conscripted labor, and many of them died while working there. And according to legend, many of them are actually buried within the wall. But we do know that with the wall, Qin Shi Huangdi had some success in fighting the nomads because it enabled him to keep them out. And here's an interesting fact. Now, as I said, it's believed that the wall is about 5,500 miles long. But about 5 years ago, a new archaeological survey was done by by a department within the Chinese government. And they determined that the Great Wall is actually more than double that length. The report estimates that the Great Wall actually extends 13,470 miles long across 15 different provinces. So this is a big difference from 5,500 miles. And as I said, it was very successful at keeping the nomads out. We see a ruthless gathering of control in his hands. He hoped to establish a rule that, as he said, quote, would be enjoyed by my sons for 10,000 generations. But there's a problem. He had angered a lot of the Chinese people. So, think about it. Who would he have angered? Well, there's the nobles because he took their land. There's the Confucianists because he's adopted legalism and everyone else can't practice what they've always practiced. We see repression of intellectuals, harsh punishments, taxes, forced labor. In 213 BC, Qin Shi Huangdi outlawed all other schools of thought, as I said, except for legalism. And he ordered book burning. So all books like Confucian texts that didn't line up with legalist thought, they're gone. 346 to 460, we're not sure the exact number, but somewhere in between there, that number of Confucians who lived in the Qin capital were buried alive at one time because Qin Shi Huangdi wanted to set an example. And these were men who had defied him in his mind because they refused to give up their beliefs. And this is a quote that I want to read to you from a contemporary. He killed men as though he thought he could never finish. He punished men as though he were afraid he would never get around to them, and the whole world revolted against him. End quote. Now, the emperor died in 210 BC, and there had been so much weakening and chaos during his reign that 4 years after his death, the dynasty was overthrown. So, as I said at the beginning, they only ruled for about 15 years. Yes, they made a huge imprint on China, but they weren't around that long. Their ideas, however, will live far beyond them. Probably the coolest cultural artifact from Qin China is what's called the Tomb Army. In 1974, farmers were drilling a well and they just accidentally discovered a remarkable underground pit about 100 miles east of the burial site of the first Qin emperor. To date, more than 8,000 life-size terracotta figures of warriors and horses have been unearthed, and you see some of them here in this picture. Historians believe that construction of this mausoleum began around 246 BC, and it's believed to have taken 700,000 workers and craftsmen 38 years to complete. Qin Shi Huangdi was interred inside the tomb complex upon his death in 210 BC. According to a Han historian, so the Han dynasty follows the Qin, so this is going to be a little later. According to this historian, the first emperor was buried alongside great amounts of treasure and objects of craftsmanship, as well as a scale replica of the universe, complete with gemmed ceilings representing the cosmos and flowing mercury representing the great earthly bodies of water. Pearls were also placed on the ceiling of the tomb to represent the stars and planets and so forth. Recent scientific work at the site has actually shown high levels of mercury in the soil around the tomb. So this suggests that the description that we have might be pretty accurate of the site's contents. The army of terracotta warriors was built for the king, for Emperor Qin, to use in the afterlife because he would need protection. At least 8,099 figures have been found so far at the site, and these figures include infantry, archers, and officers, and they're manufactured in a crouching pose as well as standing poses. Each figure was given a real weapon, such as bronze spears, swords, or wooden crossbows with bronze fittings. It's believed the weapons may have been used in actual warfare. Along with the soldiers and officers, we see chariots made with great detail and precision, and they were also included as part of Qin Shi Huangdi's army. The terracotta figures are very lifelike and they're life-sized. They vary in height, uniform, and hairstyle in accordance with their rank. The colored lacquer finish and molded faces, because each one is individual, and the real weapons and armor used in manufacturing these figures creates a very realistic appearance, and it stands as a testament to the amount of labor and skill involved in their construction. It's also proof of the incredible amount of power the first emperor possessed in order for such a monumental undertaking to be completed. So if you think about everything that would be involved, all the manpower, all the resources in manufacturing this terracotta army, well, that's because you have a very powerful man in control. Here you can get an idea of the size of these figures, and this picture actually shows archaeologists working with some of the figures, and what's really neat is they've actually found more, and so there's probably even now still more out there because they continue periodically to find some. Today, it's estimated that nearly 2 million people visit the site annually, and about one-fifth of them are foreigners. And this army, this terracotta army, serves today as both just a phenomenal archaeological discovery, but also as an icon of China's distant past that's recognizable the world over. And I know periodically they will send some of these figures on tour around the world, so to speak. I know several years ago some of them were at Epcot, and so I would just urge you, if you're ever in a place where there are some, there for display, I'd urge you to go see them. They're pretty breathtaking. So the Qin dynasty collapses, and then what? Well, the Han dynasty comes to power. And the Han will rule from 202 BC to 220 AD, and the reign of the Han lasts about 400 years, and it's commonly considered within China to be one of the greatest periods in the entire history of China. And even today, members of the ethnic majority of Chinese people call themselves people of the Han, in order of the Liu family that founded the dynasty. During the Han dynasty, China officially became a Confucian state, and it prospered domestically. We see flourishing agriculture, handicrafts, commerce is flourishing. The population reaches over 50 million. Meanwhile, the empire extended its political and cultural influence over surrounding areas like Korea, Mongolia, Vietnam, and Central Asia before it finally collapsed under a combination of domestic and external pressures. And if you look at this map, you can see how large the Han Dynasty was. The first ruler of the Han was known as Han Gaozu, exalted emperor of Han. He was a commoner of peasant origin. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that you can, at least he did, rise from the bottom to the top. And he becomes the emperor, and one of the first things he does is to get rid of the harsh legalistic policies of the Qin dynasty. He replaces them with Confucian principles. He was described as efficient and benevolent, but he did keep some of the administrative reforms of the Qin. For example, he kept the division of the central government into the three branches: civil, military, and the censorate. He kept the system of local government that divided the empire into provinces and counties. What else does he do? Well, Confucianism becomes official state policy. So think about it. Why would Confucian principles be a good foundation for a unified state? Well, you've got everybody, theoretically, working together for the good of the whole, from the leader on down. He kept the Qin policy of selecting government officials on merit rather than birth. Local officials were asked to recommend worthy candidates. And he wanted to create a regular system, so he introduced a civil service examination. And this was basically a test that you had to take to prove that you could do the job. And we have this today. If you go downtown and want to get a job with the city government, you have to take the civil service examination. You have to prove that you're qualified. He also created a school to train would-be bureaucrats. So what did they learn? The teachings of Confucius, Chinese history, and law. So he wants educated officials working in his government, not just people who were there because they inherited the position through noble lineage. He created well-trained officials schooled in Confucian thought, and this was a system that ensured the influence of Confucianism for a long time. So again, why would a government promote and support Confucian thought as a state philosophy? It brings unity. We see a dramatic population increase. It goes from 20 million to 50 million to 60 million, and with it, the need for a large and efficient bureaucracy. We also see territorial expansion. They move into regions south of the Yangtze River, into northern Vietnam, and westward into Central Asia. They continued to have to deal with the Xiongnu, those nomads beyond the Great Wall, and they had a lot of success in pushing them back. They continued the Qin policy of free peasants paying taxes directly to the state. But under the Han, we start to see a problem. We see combined tax burdens. It's not just the land tax that they have to pay, but there's forced labor, there's other obligations on the peasants. We see the land that they hold, the land holdings being reduced as the government takes some back. You have a larger population that reduces individual holdings because the government's taking land back and redistributing it. And so what happens is that over time, many poor peasants were forced to sell their land. And again, they became tenant farmers who paid rent to the aristocrats. So what the Qin had tried to accomplish was undone under the Han. They ended up giving nobles a powerful base with private military forces. So it's just not an easy time for peasants. We see major expansion of trade and manufacturing. Government-owned shipyards, manufactured weapons, and controlled mining and the operation of granaries. There's regional and international trade through Central and Southeast Asia, and even as far away as India and the Mediterranean. Ultimately, economic problems in the countryside and poor leadership will lead to a downfall of the dynasty. But in general, the Han Dynasty was a very prosperous time.